Hi, everyone. I'm Vladimir Dutip. We are watching all the news happening in the United States and around the world. America watches as Wall Street begins the week with a sell-off. We look at markets and how the White House is framing the president's economic strategy. Plus, a countdown to a shutdown. The House could soon vote on its short-term spending plan. But does the Speaker have the votes in not only his own party, but also the Senate? And where is she? The search intensifies for a college student who went missing in the Dominican Republic. We'll hear from her parents who have joined the effort. This is CBS News 24/7. Traders are bracing for the possibility of another volatile day on Wall Street. It comes after yesterday's triple-digit drops across all three major markets. The open was relatively flat this morning. The Dow dropped slightly at the opening bell. So we're taking a look at the market. It's down about 235 points, but it's the beginning of the trading day. We're going to talk to our business analyst, Jill Schlesinger, just about what happened yesterday and what she sees coming for the next couple of weeks and months. In fact, Jill Schlesinger is joining me here in Studio 55 to talk more about this.
I put my shoes on.
Good to see you. I mean,
Good Lord.
This is the kind of place where we do that, Jill. It's streaming, everything is good, everything's cool here. We're young, we're hip, we're with it. That's the bottom line here.
Except for this guest.
All right, so let's talk about what happened yesterday.
Oh, gosh. It was rough.
Yeah.
You know, it was a big sell-off. It's always scary when these sell-offs occur. 2%, 2.5% for the large stocks, 4% for the NASDAQ. That was the worst day this year. It's actually the worst single day since September. The NASDAQ, the big conglomeration of all these technology companies, that actually has seen a correction, down by more than 10%, actually down 13.5% from its high at the end of last year. But where we are is essentially that the world of investing is made up of human beings. Breaking news. And those human beings are feeling a little freaked out by the on-again, off-again tariffs, retaliations, cuts at the government, and it is making people feel concerned enough that we could see the economy slow down.
So we should point out to our viewers, and you and I have talked about this, that the stock market is not necessarily the economy. But as you know, if there's optimism and enthusiasm and stocks are going up, then people feel good. It's a sentiment that abounds not just with investors, but with businesses as well. In contrast, when we see a bear market or when we see a downturn in the market, people get pessimistic. We've started to see, for example, retail stocks that are not doing so well. They're missing their targets, Walmart, Target, because they're doing business. Most of their stuff is made in China, right? So if this turns out to be a correction, what does that portend for the economy and GDP?
You know, okay, so you're right. Two different things, right? What is the economy? When we say big picture, all we're talking about is the government tallies up all the goods and services that are sold. And we get a number, and that's the gross domestic product. And when the number goes up from year to year, that's an expansion and a growing economy. And if it shrinks, that's a recession. That's bad. Now, the reality is, when you think about like where we are with the stock market and the economy, you're right that usually stocks would rise in a growing economy, right? Because you sort of get the wind at your sails and people are feeling good. They have jobs, they're getting wage increases, they spend money, companies make money. But there have been times where the two diverge. In fact, it happened recently. In 2022, we had the U.S. economy growing, grew by about 2%. The stock market got hammered. It was down 20% that year. And so a lot of what we're talking about when we talk about the stock market, the economy, they are separate. They can lead to feed on one another. And what I think you're talking about is that when people feel good about the stock market and it goes up, we have something called the wealth effect. Hey, my 401k is going up. I have a job. I feel good. That's awesome, right? And maybe I'll spend a little bit more. But it doesn't always work. And by the way, only about 60% of Americans own stocks at all. That might be shocking for a lot of you, especially if you've been like one of those people who jumped in the stock market during the meme stocks or you started to play with Robinhood. You know, there's a whole group of people who have zero investments. So they're much more concerned with how's the economy doing? And right now, the economy continues to grow. But again, we're fearful that it could slow down. And, you know, we don't worry about a recession like overall, like, oh, my God, it's the worst thing in the world. There haven't been that many. But when you have recessions, what we're worried about is job losses. And as someone liked to say, I think it was maybe Warren Buffett or someone like that, would say that, you know, what is a depression? It's when you lose your job. A recession is when someone else loses their job.
Right.
So, when we see job losses, it can really harm us. It harms our ability to spend. And of course, it affects us emotionally.
So before you go, Jill, I want you to give, and we don't give advice here, but I want you to sort of put some perspective on people who may be thinking about their own personal finances. I've just watched over the last 24 hours MAGA faithful Trump supporters trying to spin the fact that the market has been coming down over the last couple of weeks as a good thing. I saw Senator Tommy Tuberville say that he thinks that the stock market was too high under President Biden. This guy doesn't know anything about stocks. He's a football coach. I know he knows everything about football, but I think it's interesting that people are trying to spin it politically. If you are an investor and you're listening to the noise, either people telling you that it's a great thing that the market is going down or people telling you, hey, look, these things happen, these corrections happen, what should you be doing?
Okay, so first of all, stock market going down is normal. There's nothing really good about it. It's not pleasant. It's sort of like, I want to get sick. Like sometimes you're going to get sick, and that stinks. You're going to get better.
Right.
So we don't say it's good to be sick.
That's right.
I think that if you're looking at the markets and it unnerves you, it's nice to go back to your basics. So the thing I think really does soothe most of us is to take some action. And so one action item would be like, hey, let me just make sure, do I have 6 to 12 months of my living expenses in a safe account? Have I pulled money out of the market that I need to pay a tuition bill, or I got to buy a car or a home down payment? Is that money out of the risky stuff? Also, have I started to whittle away at my debt, my credit card debt, my student loan, my auto loan? And if those things are all in line, hey, let me look at my retirement account. That's long-term money. That's a good way for me to put some money to work. Maybe I can knock up my 401k contribution by a percentage point or 2 percentage points. Those are things you can do. But also, I want everyone to remember that if you are investing, it's for the long term. There are going to be downturns. There are going to be upswings. You usually can't get a lot of up only. You get up and down.
That's right.
The good news is, as you know, you were in the investment business for a while. This is like one of those classic things. It's crazy. Stocks go up 70% of the time, but you really have to stay in it. You can't get in and out.
Good point. Jill, always great to have you. Shoes or no shoes. Love having you here all the time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let's continue this conversation with CBS News White House reporter Olivia Rinaldi. So, Olivia, the president obviously watches the stock markets intently. I recall during the first Trump administration, every time the market went up, he would tweet about it. He would suggest that this is the greatest thing that's ever happened. But now, in the second Trump administration, he's asked a question about a recession. Is there one coming? And can you say to Americans that there won't be a recession? And he says, I don't think I can say that. So how is the administration trying to frame this?
Yeah, Vlad, certainly this is a president that likes to celebrate those market wins, and this White House is downplaying that market sell-off we saw yesterday. A White House official told us they see a strong divergence between what they're calling short-term animal spirits of the market. That's that bear and bull market that's really associated with those market rises and market sell-offs, and what they're seeing unfold from businesses and business leaders, saying essentially what they're hearing behind closed doors is that people are excited about that economy that Trump is going to create, and they're excited to come to the U.S. and make and build their companies here. But that's certainly a bit of a divergence from what we're seeing, what Americans are seeing and feeling happening in the stock market right now. Kevin Hassett, who's the White House National Economic Director, also told CNBC yesterday that there's a lot of reasons to be bullish about the future of the economy, but there are going to be some blips in the data that we're going to see, particularly over this next quarter, the first 3 to 4 months of this administration. He said that there's going to be small squeaks of positive data, and then they're expecting that the second quarter there's going to be a large boom of businesses. And Vlad, that's really what this White House is counting on. They think that combined with these tariffs, potentially Trump's tax cuts that could be put into law again by Congress. A reminder, that's also something they need to do in addition to funding the government, and that's coming up this week. But in addition to all of this, it's going to create economic conditions that's going to lead to a boom later. But as I point out, and as Jill just pointed out, Americans are feeling the squeeze right now with this market sell-off and with all of these tariffs that are really uncertain. Americans are feeling that squeeze, and that's certainly reflected in the data.
So Let's talk about those tariffs, because I think if you're not keeping up to speed with all this, it's hard to know where we are, because every week the president changes his mind. First he says tariffs are coming, then he says he's holding off again. Then he says they're coming, then he says they're holding off again. So we know that more are on the way. We know that China has implemented tariffs on certain goods, and that is certainly going to hurt American consumers. I pointed out to Jill that some of the retail stocks are doing poorly because they're missing their earnings targets, primarily because a lot of their crap is manufactured in China. So what do we think is going to happen before they actually take effect? Where are we with regards to Mexico and Canada, and what is the president saying about the tariffs to come?
Well, Vlad, I'm really glad you brought that up in the back and forth about all these tariffs, because Trump just announced more tariffs against Canada coming tomorrow. He says this is in response to Ontario saying they're going to place a 25% tariff on electricity going to the U.S. He just announced on True Social that an additional 25 to 50% tariff on steel and aluminum coming into the U.S. from Canada, and that will go into effect tomorrow. So you talk about this seesawing, this back and forth that we're seeing in this trade war, and it's hard to keep track of exactly what product is tariffed at what level it's tariffed at, if it's on a pause, if we're going to see reciprocal tariffs. So this just breaking, this will be going into effect tomorrow. So important to be watching any companies that could be impacted by this. I'm thinking home ownership, I'm thinking Home Depot, Lowe's, any of those types of companies, retail companies that will certainly be impacted by this. And I also want to point out we're about 22 days away from those reciprocal tariffs going into effect. Those will happen on April 2nd. And those are not just happening to Canada, Mexico, and China, but to all countries that Trump says levies a tariff on U.S. goods. So maximize what's impacted right now by tariffs by a couple trillion. And that's what we'll be seeing in 3 weeks. So a lot of this uncertainty, a lot of this back and forth, we know there are conversations going on between this White House and Canada and Mexico about how to lessen these tariffs. And Trump says he wants to see more done on fentanyl specifically. But to all of those countries that will be experiencing tariffs in 3 weeks, what does Trump need to see from them to get those tariffs perhaps pushed off, lessened, and the ultimate question of how this is all going to impact Americans and their pocketbooks as well.
All right, Olivia Rinaldi breaking it down for us. Thank you, Olivia. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, one thing Olivia mentioned, Congress could vote as early as today on a continuing resolution to avoid a government shutdown. That's happening later this week. The bill would need to pass the House and the Senate to avoid the first government shutdown since 2018. I want to bring in CBS News congressional reporter Torian Small, who's on Capitol Hill for us. So, Torian, I've noticed that there is a Republican holdout, Thomas Massie. Now the president's calling for him to be primaried. But the bigger question is, does Johnson or Ken Johnson rely on any Democrats, or are they, rather than holding up signs and sitting on their hands during a Trump speech, actually going to use their power in Congress to reject the continuing resolution that is being put forth by the Republicans?
So, Vlad, to your question, can Johnson depend on Democrats to push through this continuing resolution? Simple answer, no, period. But the more complicated part of this is whether or not Senate Democrats will be able to confer with Senate Republicans to push through this continuing resolution, or a similar version of this resolution, because the bigger threshold is within that chamber, whether or not they could bypass the filibuster in order to push this continuing resolution through. Speaker Johnson is speaking right now with other Republican leaders in the House. And during this press conference, they're saying that their plan is to push through with their intention of moving this CR to the president's desk. If that doesn't happen, if there happens to be a few defectors on the House side, or if it ultimately passes and the Senate is where it dies, they'll blame the government shutdown that could happen solely on Democrats, saying that they're not willing to come to the table and negotiate this. Democrats, however, are saying, look, we asked for a clean resolution as we've done before in the past. We're willing to play ball with you, go until September to keep the government open, but you got to get rid of some of these changes that you're asking for. Republicans Republicans are looking to cut about $13 billion in non-defense spending, increase spending for defense. That also includes more money for border control and enforcement. That's just something Democrats aren't willing to do. In fact, they would like to see more controls on the money that is appropriation actually being spent versus what we've seen under the first less than 100 days of Donald Trump's administration, where he's been gutting some of these departments. That's a non-starter for Speaker Johnson. And right now, his relationship with leader Hakeem Jeffries is not, they're not seeing eye to eye. So it's unlikely that we'll get some type of resolution before that Friday deadline where that government shutdown could happen.
I've seen people suggesting that this is Speaker Johnson's fault for pushing this resolution to this time period. He pushed it back when he needed votes within his own party to be elected to Speaker of the House of Representatives. And now the chickens are coming home to roost. As for Democrats, Torian, look, some of those programs that Republicans want to cut are programs that Democrats campaign on for their constituents. So if they sign on to a resolution that actually effectively cuts the things that they are passionate about and the things that they say that they bring to their constituency, the question becomes where the threshold is for pain. A government shutdown affects everybody. And I know that the Senate is concerned about that. There are some senators, both Republican and Democrat, who don't think a government shutdown is ever a good thing. But what other options do they have if they're going to get funding cut for the things that they care about?
Well, the only other option is to do what they've done before. When Johnson has had his shoulders or his back to the wall, metaphorically or figuratively, he had to turn to Democrats to help him out. Donald Trump, I should remind you, during the last continuing resolution stopgap debate, came out and said Republicans need to ask for more, especially before an election. You guys got to push back on more. You got to eliminate the debt ceiling for me coming in so I can have a little bit more wiggle room to work with my agenda. Republicans tried that. They cannot find consensus within their own party. So at the 11th hour, Johnson went to Democrats, asked them to support a clean resolution, continuing resolution, which is what we saw. If a government shutdown happens, though, we'll see massive disruptions to the American people. This is top of mind because of Southwest Airlines news that they're cutting back on some of their perks. But airports is where we saw the biggest strain for consumers. TSA agents will be impacted by this. They're considered essential workers, but we saw not too long ago this mass sick-off where agents were calling in sick. That's longer lines to wait to get past security, which means potentially delays to you getting to your flights. That's just the tip of the iceberg of the impacts a government shutdown could have on the American people, which is why we're seeing lawmakers across the aisle looking for some type of solution. Democrats put out their own CR, but it's unlikely, again, unless this fails, Johnson's going to need to come back to the table with Democrats to get that across the finish line.
All right, Torian Small for us this morning. Thank you, Torian. Appreciate it. Russia says at least 3 people have been killed in a massive Ukrainian drone attack on the Moscow region overnight in what appears to be Kyiv's largest drone attack on Russia since the start of the war. The attacks come as U.S. and Ukrainian officials are holding high-level face-to-face talks in Saudi Arabia this morning that's aimed at bringing an end to the conflict. I want to bring in Michael Bosarku. He's a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center and joins me now to talk about this. So, Michael, I watched an interview that my colleague Tony DeCopel did with Senator Mark Kelly, who, as you know, just visited Ukraine. He came back. He put his points out on social media. Elon Musk called him a traitor. What Senator Kelly told my colleague Tony is that what Ukraine simply wants are security guarantees. They may even realize that some of the territory that's been lost, specifically in Crimea, they're not going to get back. But without any security guarantees, it's tough for them to make a deal. So are they likely to get that?
Good to be with you. Well, the signals coming out of Jeddah right now are pretty positive from both sides. They say progress is being made, but I would actually be very surprised if we got to the stage where that rare earth minerals deal is signed, the one Mr. Trump seems to really want, as well as what Ukraine is asking for, which is, of course, security guarantees, but also it wants, for the time being, a ceasefire in the air and on the sea. But I think we're in a situation where, Russia in previous talks seemed to have been getting a lot of concessions, whereas for Ukraine and the United States, it's all very extractive. Not only does Mr. Trump want those minerals, but also he's paused military aid, USAID aid, and intelligence sharing. So it's very, very lopsided. I think if this continues, that Trump peace train for the Ukrainians will be coming to an end. And maybe, just maybe, they'll want to look for another interlocutor trusted by Russia, like Saudi Arabia, Turkey, or one of the other Gulf states.
Right. So ahead of today's meeting, as you know, Secretary of State Marco Rubio said both Ukraine and Russia will have to make concessions. You've already outlined what concessions the Ukrainians would have to make. Have you heard anything that's been reported on what kind of concessions Russia would have to make?
Well, I mean, they've actually not had to. They didn't have to make any concessions in order, for example, to get restrictions on diplomatic properties in the United States lifted. You're going to start seeing a lot of Russian diplomats coming back to the United States, probably a lot of them KGB operatives. But Russia has so far given out signals that they're not willing to come to the negotiating table with full sincerity for peace. They've already written off this Ukrainian proposal for a temporary ceasefire in the air and on the seas. So it doesn't look good. And, you know, that massive, unprecedented drone strike you referred to overnight in Russia, including Moscow, that was Ukraine saying to them two things. Number one, we're going to bring this war to your doorsteps. And number two, we actually do have cards to play with. And perfectly timed, I think, for Russia to feel some pressure to come to the negotiating table and offer something in return.
Michael, before you go, could the United Kingdom, France, other NATO allies provide that security guarantee if the United States was unwilling to do so?
Maybe down the road, but for the moment, there's been years and years of neglect, not only in Europe, in the United Kingdom, but also my home country of Canada. And you can't simply flip the switch and all of a sudden there's tanks and jet aircraft and other things willing to go to Ukraine. They can fill some of the gaps, apparently, in terms of intelligence, which is what Ukraine needs, and also humanitarian aid. Ukraine has a $3.5 billion a month budget deficit, so it needs access to those frozen Russian assets, most of them in Europe, to help pay the bills here, pensions and stuff like that. One more quick thing. I am in Moldova. This is a frontier country between Western Europe and Ukraine. A lot of anxiety here about possibly Mr. Putin exploiting this void that has been created by the U.S. temporary withdrawal of aid and coming up to the borders of the country, if not further.
Well, and that's an excellent point you make as we end our discussion, simply because if there are if Russians are not held to account for their past transgressions, what would they worry about an incursion into Moldova, which is obviously much, much smaller than Ukraine, and perhaps would not be able to put up the resistance the Ukrainians have been able to do. But to your other point, perhaps it is time then, and the president has suggested this as well, that Europeans take a stronger interest in, I know they've upped their defense spending over the last decade, but perhaps take the lead in protecting their continent, and as the United States seeks to isolate themselves from situations like the one we're in right now. Michael Bostrecue, a really, really interesting discussion. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
All right, switching gears now. Search efforts are ramping up to find a missing college student who was staying at a resort in the Dominican Republic. What police are saying right now, we'll tell you. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. The U.S. flag tanker that collided with a cargo ship yesterday in the North Sea is still on fire today. Britain's Coast Guard says 36 crew members were rescued and brought to shore after the crash. One crew member from the Portuguese flagship is still missing. I want to bring in CBS News correspondent Ian Lee, who's covering the story from Hull, England. So, Ian, let me ask you, where does the investigation into the crash stand currently?
Well, Vlad, they're trying to figure out how this Portuguese flagship crashed into the American vessel. When I spoke with one of the sailors on the ship, he said that crew members looked at the bridge of the Portuguese ship and it didn't seem like anyone was there, and that it took about 10 minutes for the ship to stop its engines. And so these are things that investigators are going to look at. We've heard from authorities, they say there hasn't been any foul play, but they're going to be looking into human error when it comes to what caused this crash. That person also told me they gave GPS coordinates the night before when they were anchored so that other ships would know where they were. So there's a lot of things that they're going to be looking into as this investigation goes forward.
So what was each ship carrying? Is there any indication that whatever has spilled into the sea is dangerous?
Well, right now, that is one of the key things, Vlad. They're trying to contain any sort of spill of whether jet fuel or ship oil. And all up and down this coast, there are bird sanctuaries. And there's concern that if that oil, that contamination gets into the fish, the birds eat the fish, that it could have a devastating effect on the environment here. And so authorities are keen to make sure that doesn't happen. We heard from the operator of that Portuguese flagged Solong saying that they're going to work with authorities to make sure that the damage is minimal.
All right, Ian Lee reporting from Hull. Thank you, Ian, as always, my friend. Appreciate it. All right, to hear about this, Southwest Airlines is making changes to something that has been incredibly popular for them over the years, its checked bag policy. We're going to tell you what you need to know. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Here's a look at some of the top stories we're following for you this morning. Doctors say Pope Francis is no longer in imminent danger of death. He's been in the hospital for the past 2 months due to pneumonia. Despite some serious setbacks in recent weeks, the 88-year-old Pope is in stable condition. Blood tests show he has made a significant progress in his recovery. The Menendez brothers have hit a new roadblock in their attempts to get out of prison. LA District Attorney Nathan Hochman announced yesterday he is against resentencing them for the murder of their parents. Hochman says Lyle and Eric Menendez have failed to show that they're no longer a danger to the public. Governor Gavin Newsom has ordered the state parole board to conduct a risk assessment within 90 days to help him decide if he will grant clemency. And for the first time in history, Southwest Airlines will start charging for checked bags. The new policy will go into effect May 28th. It won't apply to A-list preferred flyers and business select ticket holders. Previously, the airline allowed passengers to have two free checked bags regardless of ticket status. You can tell I fly Southwest all the time. I have no idea what any of that means because I've never flown them in my life. But apparently people really like the checked bag thing. Did you ever? No? So you're in New York. You're a New Yorker. What do you know? All right. Officials are now calling for a worldwide police alert to be issued as the search intensifies for the missing college student in the Dominican Republic. University of Pittsburgh student Sudika Kanaki was last seen on a beach in Punta Cana on Thursday. CBS News national correspondent Manny Bojorquez has more.
We are at the headquarters of the Dominican Republic's National Police, and it's here that an official confirmed to us that indeed the FBI is now involved and assisting with this investigation. This comes as local police revealed that they are re-interviewing the people who were with Kanaki last week before she disappeared at that beachside resort in the community of Punta Cana on the east coast of this country. Now, Kananki's parents have been there. They have been urging officials to widen their investigation. An investigation that started as a possibility that she drowned. Officials are now saying we will explore all options, not saying that there is anything specifically at this point pointing to, not saying publicly that there's anything pointing to any foul play, but just that they are exploring all avenues. The president of the Dominican Republic has said that any necessary resources will indeed be devoted to this investigation. That will include additional personnel if necessary and even specialized marine equipment. Back to you.
All right, Manny, thank you very much. All right, taking you now to Capitol Hill, where House Republicans are speaking ahead of the expected budget vote. We just heard a little while ago from Speaker Mike Johnson. Let's play back what he said.
Assistance to keep the government open.
No, we'll have the votes. We're going to pass the CR. We can do it on our own. But what I'm saying is Democrats ought to do the responsible thing, follow their own advice in every previous scenario, and keep the government open. It's their choice. I wish it could be a unanimous vote in the House chamber today. That would be a great thing for America. But they're not going to do it, Chad, because they're on this this lost, they're wandering in the wilderness and they're cursing the sky at the same time. And you're going to see that today. They're going to vote no, and they're going to come out and try to pan it, and they're going to lie about it. And we're calling on you guys to call them to account, make them tell you the truth about the bill. They didn't read it before they said all that nonsense. So ask them that. Ask them how they, yeah, Manu.
The president went after one of your own colleagues yesterday.
All right, you heard it here first, folks. Speaker Johnson says he has the votes to pass a budget continuing resolution. That vote is expected today. He did take a shot at Democrats, saying he expects them all to vote no, but he says he has the votes. We'll see. Stick around for that. All right, meanwhile, a group of service members are going to court to the Trump. A group of people are going to court to fight the Trump administration's new ban on transgender troops. The lawsuit has been filed on behalf of 6 active service members and 2 seeking enlistment. The new ban is part of the Pentagon's efforts to eliminate DEI programs. Let's bring in CBS senior national security correspondent Charlie D'Agata. Charlie, so let me make sure I got that right, because it wasn't written well in the intro there. So the lawsuit says that there's a captain, a major, and a sergeant, and a Navy pilot, and they are the ones fighting this ban that has been implemented by President Trump. Did I get that right?
Yes, you did. And, you're forgiven for seeing how complicated it is, because it could be a ban, it could have absolute repercussions, it could be instant, and there are a number of transgender service members that this will affect immediately. So in terms of that number, it's hard to get the official number because it's not something that they declare upon enlistment. Transgender troops that we spoke to about this story, they explained to us that some members had already transitioned, some are in the process or were in the process of transitioning. Others just simply didn't declare it either way. But the advocacy group Sparta, along with the UCLA study, puts the estimate at between about 10 and 15,000 service members. So, proportionally, that's not a lot. The military has about 1.3 million active duty personnel. However, many of these individuals, they're highly trained, tens of thousands of dollars invested in that training. For example, one of the service members we spoke to is a nuclear technician. Another works in the realm of Navy intelligence and targeting. So these are highly skilled individuals. And they argue not only are they capable to do the jobs that they're asked to do, but there's been a lot of money invested in the training of these individuals.
So remind us, Charlie, of other efforts that are being taken into account when we talk about this DEI purge that President Trump has implemented.
Yeah, well, so last month the Pentagon was tasked, the DOD, this building was tasked with identifying transgender troops, and within 30 days, they would have to be removed to start separating them for the rest of the group. So in terms of sheer numbers, that is the largest DEI program that they're sort of going after, as it were. In terms of the hires, the highest ranking military officer here in the building, General C.Q. Brown, he was removed a couple of weeks ago. He's the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The highest ranking female officer is the Chief of Naval Operations, Lisa Franchetti, Admiral Lisa Franchetti. She was removed, both of those seen as DEI removals. There's also another thing where they're kind of going through this. All of the branches have been tasked to go through their own databases to remove any DEI images, any DEI references. And there's, according to that database, is at least 26,000 images that have already been identified. It may be tens of thousands more. So genuinely, they're going through this database of data and images and erasing anything that could be seen as being associated with DEI.
All right. No word, I guess, Charlie, if the Enola Gay, the aircraft that dropped the atomic bomb on Japan, who is, I guess, being framed for having a same-sex lover, is somehow going to be reinstated in the Smithsonian.
Exactly right. So, Vlad, that sort of underlines the absurdity of it all. So if you are doing a database search, right, in theory, you're going to search for the word gay, and that's what flagged Enola Gay. And that image, and then they say, well, wait a minute, that's not what we meant. That was obviously a mistake. But if you're going through this, what this building is like, this massive database of information, and you get the flash word of gay, Enola Gay is going to come up, and that's why it made the headlines.
I think the Enola Gay was bi anyway. Bi plane, get it, Charlie? All right.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, my brother.
All right, Brad,
Appreciate
take
it.
care.
My fellow Americans, tonight I want to speak with you about our nation's unprecedented response to the coronavirus outbreak that started in China and is now spreading throughout the world. Today, the World Health Organization officially announced that this is a global pandemic. We have been in frequent contact with our allies, and we are marshaling the full power of the federal government and the private sector to protect the American people.
Well, that was 5 years ago today. The World Health Organization declared the coronavirus a pandemic. What followed was a near complete shutdown of life as we knew it. The virus killed nearly 7 million people around the world and sickened more than 650 million others. Cities across the U.S. shut down for weeks, leading to mass job loss and set the country up for major economic loss, of which we are still dealing with today. The pandemic also led to a fierce debate over the way people should protect themselves. Dr. Bob Lahita joined CBS Morning News earlier to reflect on the last 5 years.
There was a time, Harold, when I thought every day I was going to die. I was dressed up in personal protective equipment. We couldn't have enough of it. Double gloves, Tyvek suits, masks, shields, head coverings, and special shoes. You can imagine. And we fought over this equipment because we thought we were next.
Doctors say we're in a much better place now, but there are still people getting infected with COVID. There's a major storm brewing out west, and it could bring a multi-day severe weather outbreak by the end of this week. Let's bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Andrew Kozak with the first look at the national forecast. Hey, Andrew.
Hey, good morning, Vlad. Yeah, while a lot of the country is actually going to be shaping up to see a beautiful day today, we're getting that atmospheric river. Remember that? That is coming right back for the West Coast, delivering wind, rain, and as Vlad just mentioned, severe weather that may be setting up as we head into the end of the week. Take a look as we head into tomorrow. One wave coming in. We have snow in the Cascades and the higher elevations, heavy rain for many areas, and then we have another system that will be coming in for Friday. Wind alerts already set up and down California. We could be looking at fire danger being an issue again before the rain comes in. The rain, of course, does alleviate that a bit, but we could have gusts over 45 miles per hour. Rainfall will be impressive. By the end of the day on Thursday, we could easily be looking at anywhere between 2 and 5 inches of rain. That will include areas like LA, a little further inland, and all the way down to the Mexican border, of course, including San Diego. Let's take a look at the national weather today. Windy across the desert Southwest and cool. Temperatures like 58 degrees in LA. Meantime, we're much warmer than that. It is going to be warmer in areas like Boston than it will be in Southern California. 70s and 80s for a large portion of the country. 70s all the way up and down 95 corridor, including areas like Philadelphia, New York, could be well into the 60s to near 70 degrees. High temperatures versus the national average temperatures. Yeah, take a look. Many of us are today going to be across the eastern half of the country, 15 to 25 degrees above average. There's some cooler air, though, in the northern areas, northern plains. That will start to move in for Wednesday across those areas. So we're going to go from the 60s and 70s back into the 40s and 50s across the I-95 corridor tomorrow. But then we warm right back up as we head into the end of the week. More on this. And, of course, we're also tracking the rain out in California. We'll have that in a bit.
All right, Andrew, thanks very much. A federal judge temporarily blocks deportation of a pro-Palestinian activist, while the Trump administration says it's the first of many ICE arrests on the way. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. More protests are expected today over the Trump administration's attempt to deport a pro-Palestinian activist. Mahmoud Khalid is accused of anti-Semitic activity for his role in helping lead demonstrations at Columbia University last year. ICE agents took him into custody over the weekend, and a federal judge blocked his deportation, at least for now, with a court hearing set for tomorrow. CBS News correspondent Lilia Luciano joins me here in Studio 55. Good to see you. So he has a green card. What is the Trump administration saying about trying to revoke it?
Well, first, the Trump administration has said that they revoked his green card. I talked to attorneys, including one of his attorneys, who say that that DHS does not have the authority to do that, that there needs to be a process, that there needs to be a court hearing, and that's in part what's leading to this hearing tomorrow. His attorneys are also very concerned about the fact that he was moved from New York to Louisiana. I asked, what do you suspect that explains that? And they said that it happened immediately after he filed a petition for a release, given that he is a green card holder, given that he has not been charged or convicted with any crimes. And they feel like that might have been retaliatory or perhaps seeking a more friendly jurisdiction. So far, the Department of Homeland Security has talked about his activities, or called his activities, as aligned to Hamas, which, of course, is designed a terrorist organization. So what they're saying is his activities on campus. I have been trying to find, and there have been many publications of and videos of his activities, and I haven't, heard or seen, and I've asked people who protested with him, colleagues, any addresses to support Hamas or any kind of crime where they show that he's tied to Hamas. We're still waiting to hear from the government what exactly it is that they're alleging, because if it is just the act of protesting, what I've heard from multiple faculty members and students is that this was actually a person who wasn't leading the protest, but was actually a negotiator between the administration and the student protesters. And so it seems like his role was actually in trying to keep the peace, not inflaming the discourse.
So on one hand, the Constitution of the United States under the First Amendment protects freedom of speech, even for people who protest the government's actions. But in the past, there have been instances of cases that have gone to the Supreme Court where federal prosecutors have argued that people who are, for example, communists or people who are anarchists and who are not American citizens, but who are here legally in the country, have been deported over those activities. But as you state, Lilia, they has to do, and this is what lawyers are going to have to figure out, are the actions of this individual actively supporting a terrorist organization as designated by the United States? If it turns out that it's just protesting,
right,
protesting Israeli actions in Gaza.
And as a green card holder, he has special protections, kind of like a U.S. citizen. You can't just revoke the green card. You have to prove a crime. And so, and it's interesting that you mentioned communism, because something I heard over and over from both students and faculty members is that this reeks of McCarthyism, that they're concerned that all of these actions are meant to persecute and to censor free speech.
All right. You're on top of the story. I know you're digging into it. Thank you very much for stopping by. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Coming up, more news ahead. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. American farmers are bracing for the impact of China's new 15% import tax on American farm products that includes pork, poultry, beef, and soybeans. CBS News correspondent Lana Zach has more from Mount Vernon, Iowa.
These are all beef cows. Tim Keegan calls himself a pretty basic Iowa farmer. His family's been working the land in Mount Vernon, a few hours east of Des Moines, for generations. Their livelihood comes from corn, soybeans, and a small herd of 150 cows.
How high are the stakes for you?
It's tough because within agriculture, I mean, we essentially get one chance a year to raise a crop and market that crop and sell that crop.
You don't have like 5 different harvests.
No, it's not like we're a factory where we're constantly putting out widgets every day and we can make a change and the widget's going to come out cheaper or different the next day. So we're forced to be a lot more forward thinking, just the nature of our business.
China is the largest overseas market for many U.S. farm products. Last year, the U.S. exported nearly $13 billion worth of soybeans from farmers like Keegan to China alone, and another $1.5 billion in beef. Now, import tariffs up to 15% from China are hitting cash crops.
I think people within agriculture are hoping that some of this is these tariffs and stuff will be short term from a negotiation standpoint. And if they are long term, they will have some pretty big impacts within the industry.
41 years later, we're still here.
But Mount Vernon's mayor, Thomas Weasler, says even short term tariffs on the town's farmers could send shockwaves through the economy.
We need them to be successful. And on every level, we need a thriving agricultural community. Otherwise, there's a gap in what we provide to our citizens here. It will ripple down through our main street, through our community, and it'll affect local leadership.
Lana Zach, CBS News, Mount Vernon, Iowa.
All right, folks, that does it for me, but stay right where you are after the break. Mugo Diwe is live from San Francisco with all the breaking news from coast to coast. This is CBS News 24/7.